All right, so the topic for tonight is mostly around web scraping and how do you use tools that you have available to you to scrape data from various different sites. I've actually built an example application here that I'd like you guys to I'll show you here, but to kind of help drive the demo and the project. And the talk tonight so that you guys can see what we're, the whole idea behind what we're building. So it's a little more than just Selenium and XPath. My new name is courtesy of Eloy here. First person who can, I'll run it here in the browser so you guys can, for those uninitiated, because it is a JavaScript, so if we were to run that, you get my last name. I don't know if that's... So this is what we spend most of our time doing on a daily basis. Okay, so let's get started. So Selenium at its core is really used for a lot of different purposes. But what it's really designed for doing is automating a web browser. So you can have Selenium open up a browser, whether that's Firefox or Chrome or Safari, any WebKit-based browser. There are even headless browsers. Phantom.js is one of those. I won't show you how to install Phantom.js because it's kind of it requires Node and so forth. But out of the box, Firefox will work with it. With Chrome, you'll need a driver to install, and it's fairly easy to find that stuff. Rather than spend a lot of time showing you how to set up Selenium because it can be a little bit awkward, I'm just going to show you how I do it with Firefox because it's fairly straightforward. Selenium has bindings for every language on the planet. Obviously this is a Python meetup, so we'll be doing it all with Python. And if you're familiar with CSS selectors and using, the document.query selector or jQuery or any of those things, you can essentially use Selenium to access elements on the DOM. So sometimes what I use that on a daily basis for is actually doing testing. Automating browser testing, and you can use different services like Browser Stack and forget the other one, third parties, Sauce Labs. Yeah, thank you. And you can use either one of those and run every different version of every different type of browser and run your tests in the cloud, or as Glenn likes to call it, somebody else's computer. So the other thing that you can do with Selenium is you can actually access it with XPath. So we'll talk a little bit about XPath here, but this is Selenium's beautiful website. They actually are sponsored here by Sauce Labs. And the older product they had was a Selenium IDE, but the newer version is this Selenium WebDriver. If you are trying to do more complex testing, you can actually run a standalone server, which can ferret out, run different types of browsers through a configuration. For this kind of thing that I thought it was a little bit more than we need to get into since this is kind of an intro talk, but we'll talk about just straight using Selenium. But you can see they have different drivers for different browsers. Chrome, Firefox is built in, Opera, and Safari is also supported. I think you have to download it from a different different service. So essentially, to set up Selenium and get it working is fairly straightforward. You import Selenium from Selenium, import WebDriver, and then call instantiate a version of Firefox or Chrome. And then you pass in your URL, you load up your page, and then you start extracting data from by using CSS selectors. So CSS selectors can take multiple different forms. So that can be you can do, if you wanted to, or you can add multiple types of, or classes to it. You can also just find elements by ID. So Selenium has a lot of different ways to extract information, but you can also find elements, plural, and return a list and then iterate through that list and extract information that way. So it's a fairly straightforward API to work with. The other thing you can do is with XPath. So XPath is actually a was designed to work with anything that works with XML. So it's a query language to select nodes from an XML document. HTML is, of course, a subset of XML, so you can use it. And it allows you to extract nodes in a fairly concise format. And it's a fairly straightforward language. The way that it's structured is actually fairly simple. If you're starting from a root node in every HTML5 document, the root node is actually HTML/HTML. But if you want to start somewhere else in the document body, you can access it using a double slash. But you can also do more complex queries. So you can, if we looked back at our CSS selector, we had CSS queries like so forth. But if we want to do it with XPath will support that as well. So you can, inside square brackets, add a class, and then you can even, once you're in, so the double slash actually will search the entire document and every node, and will look for this query, and it returns that value if it value matters. If there's two slashes after the first initial slash, then it's going to continue to look regardless of what elements are in between the document. Now, if this is all confusing, we'll get into a real life code example here. XPath is kind of a pain in the ass to write. So there are lots of Chrome extensions that actually help you to do that. Xpath Helper is actually a freely available Chrome extension. You can install it in your browser and essentially highlight any node that you want, hold down the shift button, and it will tell you the XPath to get to that element. And it'll do it in an absolute format. So if we go to, just to show you my talk on Google Drive doesn't click, so so I find this actually to be the easiest way to work with XPath. It's very simple. If you Google XPath Helper, you'll get to this site. And essentially, once it's enabled, it shows up as an icon here. And you just hit Control-Shift-X, and you'll get a pop-up that'll show up on the screen. So if we go to... So you'll see that there is a query window that popped up here. If I hold down Shift, it will give me the... it'll actually give me the source for the image location for the Google image here. But you can actually, and if you'll notice here, which you can see that there's a slash. Let's see if we can expand this. Can you all read that? Is it readable now? Okay. So you can see that it's given me the entire HTML to get down to this. If I inspected that element, I would also be able to. I would be able to look at that the values there as well. But what you can also do with this is actually just edit this in real time, and it gives you the same result. So I can also just find, if I wanted to, I can find all images on the page. And it actually gave me 3 results. So there's 3 images here. And what's nice about this is it actually highlights whatever you've selected. So if I wanted to find all the input tags on the page, I can just type it in my XPath helper and it just highlights it. So very handy when you're trying to scrape a page. So and again, this is, since Selenium is designed for doing multiple different things, it's, you can automate any browser and do whatever you want with that, whether that's scraping data. So and we've heard many talks at this meetup, why would I want to use Selenium? Why wouldn't I use Scrapey? Or why wouldn't I want to use some other, request library and pull the HTML and load it into Beautiful Soup and then extract the information out of Beautiful Soup? So it's a good question. There are a lot of sites who actually do some colorful things with their HTML request. And what it does is it keeps the connection open. So a lot of your sites will, the requests library and other things will not be able to close the connection. So they just hang when you call request.url. The other thing that this does is it actually renders the page in JavaScript. So if as more and more sites become JavaScript heavy, you want to be able to extract information. If the site is written in Angular or Ember, it's whatever HTML it loads gets dynamically generated and updates. So Selenium allows you to interact with the page to get to a certain location that you may not necessarily be able to scrape if you just put it in the URL. So the days of question mark, foo equals bar and baz equals this in the URL are not going to be there for much longer. And there are a lot of sites that still do it, Yahoo for one. They tend to be older websites that have less functional stuff on them. For that, Scrapey and things like that is perfect. When you're trying to get more advanced, and you're looking at JavaScript heavy sites, Selenium is the way to go. And there are other ways to do it. I mean, you don't have to use the Firefox driver. You can use anything, any one of those browsers, or a headless one if you're running this on EC2 and you want to scrape, on the server side. All right, so so let me just introduce the project that we're trying to build and give you an idea of why I built this, so that you understand what's the driving force behind some of this. So I'm in my 30s. I have a kid. I don't have a lot of time. So if I have a free day or a free evening or something like that, I can plan my day if I actually have a list of what's going on around town. So the impetus behind this was I missed an event that coincided with I was completely oblivious to it. I was home with my kid, and if I had known about it, I could have gone, made arrangements and gone to the thing. So what I wanted to do was hit up all of the sites around town and aggregate all of the events that are occurring at any given day. And this includes kids' events and anything I may want to take my family to. Scrape all of that data, shove it into a table, and then extract. After I extract all that information, make it accessible so that I can find it. So what I did was I looked at games that I may want to play. I looked at arts events that I may want to attend, and I looked at any number of things. The NBA's thing, so I could get a list of all the games. So the end result of all of that is this application here. So I'm starting with this so I can show you what the end result is, and then we'll work our way backwards to access it. So this is actually a list of, you can see there's, today, Plants vs. Zombie Garden Warfare 2 came out on GameStop. So I've aggregated this, I click on it, it'll take me to GameStop's website, I can buy it. So it makes it easy for me to keep track of all of the things that are going on. You can see I've downloaded images while I was scraping, and it's serving up those images part of the application. It gives me a little event description of where it's going on, and where this is happening. So it turns out that I'm going to A Christmas Story on Thursday, and I have multiple different events here that are part of this thing. So, and this is stretched across multiple different things. So this is a local bookstore here, Murder by the Book, which is which instigated some of this stuff. There was an author I wanted to go see. I was able to pull up this, and now I scrape it, and I'll never miss it again. So just to give you an idea of what we're trying to build, and you can see that this is, I mean, it's fairly simple. The UI is obviously nothing to be, to write home about. But what it functionally did was get all of the information that I want, put it in here, and it's easily extensible. So I can add any other event system that I want to it, and then I can, it'll just show up on the display. All right. So how do we do all of that? So to start, let's look at the most basic part of the application, which is the load driver command. So is this readable at all, or do we need to? Is that readable? Okay. So the main thing here is from Selenium import WebDriver. So once you have a WebDriver, once you've imported WebDriver, you can instantiate a Firefox instance. So if we look at this, we have a load driver function, which our different websites will call, and it'll extract, it instantiates Firefox. I get a driver. I just happen to set the window size because that's, so it's not full screen and takes up my entire monitor. And then I return the driver. So when I call that function, what it does is it opens up Firefox and it takes it to an empty data page where you can insert a URL. So now that I have that driver, that's essentially the only thing I'm going to do with the driver is interact with it by extracting information. So this is the Hobby Center's website. The Hobby Center does multiple different musical events a year, and it's serviced by two different companies, Tuts and Broadway across America. So the website is the same. You can buy tickets from the same people. So if we looked at, let's hide our Selenium code here. This is the event page where you can actually see every single musical that's occurring or any event that's occurring on their site. So every page starts with this, and we start scraping by looking at the data on here. So if you look at it, there's multiple different ways that we can start with scraping. So the mindset has to be, what information do I need? What am I going to extract? Where am I going to store it so I can run, display it on a page? So if we look at our runner application, or we'll just start with our model. So I built the scraper first and then figured out what data I wanted to store. But fundamentally, what we're looking for here is the date. And I'll go in through the Pee-wee part of this in a little bit. But date, event description, event title, link to the event, an image, and then the venue. And it's all going to store in a Pee-wee table that I can extract. So let's start with, so there is actually only one function for every one of these scraper sites. So the only thing I'm actually looking at here is this get events function. And the way I'm running all of this is through this script. So I import the Hobby Center or whatever, get events, and then save the events to a table. So if we looked at the Hobby Center's website, so we came to this index page, the first thing we want to get off of here is there is not timing information on this. It says December 8th through the 20th for A Christmas Story, the musical. So it doesn't tell me the time. So obviously they do shows at night, but on the weekends they do matinee shows at 2:30. So the only way to know that is if I'm actually inside the page. But in order to automate that process, I have to actually find all of the links on this page. So this is where XPath comes into play. So if you look here, this is the XPath to find all of the links on this page. And it may be a little hard to read. Let me expand this a little bit. So the way that we started with this is ultimately all of these are anchor tags that create links. But I looked at all of the way that the code was written, and I generated that. So if we actually looked at this, by just highlighting this one thing, it generates a bunch of gobbledygook. But what we're really looking for here is this last A tag, and we want every single A tag that generates this. So if we just, let's say we started with that, does that give us what we want? And the answer is actually it doesn't. So, and this is kind of where the ugly part of XPath goes. You start actually just deleting elements inside your XPath helper, and sure enough, I got all of the links here. So you can see that I have them because they're all highlighted, and it shows it up as results here in the page. So there may be actually multiple answers for every one of these. You obviously saw the older one that I had that's actually running in the code is much longer, but this is actually also gets me to where I want to be. So after I get all of those elements, you can see I called find elements by XPath, and this whole thing, and it returns, this is tabbed over. It gets, I get the href, which is the actual link, and store it in a URL here. And then I append it to a list, and then I run through this list inside my inside another loop. And so in that loop, I call driver.get, and then it pass it in the link, and it's going to load up the next page. So that page is actually here, is the Christmas Story, the musical website. Right, so we're trying to extract all of the information from here. So I want the title of the show, which is this, and it's the header H1 page title, and it returns back A Christmas Story, the musical. I also want the event description, and so all I need is actually the this left column. This, they use. So what I've found about this is that everybody who writes the arts, designs the web pages for the arts, is using, it's HTML4. It's not really HTML5. So they only use divs, and so you're going to encounter a lot of these things like this when you start scraping sites. A lot of them are designed by people who haven't updated it for HTML5, or they're trying to support Internet Explorer 6 or something like that. So you get some weird, syntax. But if I just wanted to get the first paragraph, I would just do P, and then I can, just like you do Python, to get the first element in a list, you can edit the code there. But essentially, what everything in all of this is just extracting that text out of there, and it shows you that indeed you got what you were looking for, and it returns this back, and then I can get the element out of there. So I get the title element, in this case is the page title. My mouse is having problems. And then if I want to get the actual text out of it, I extract the text using the .text parameter. So fairly straightforward. The elements here for the P are variables. So what I did was I say find elements by XPath, so the pluralized version. I get a list of all of the paragraph elements, and then I append them to a string. And that's what returns the result here in the Selenium. And then we do this again to extract the image for this file. So if we look at the image, this may be a little subtle to see. So if you look here, it's brighter. When it actually highlights an image, it's darkened it. And you can actually get the source by just typing at source. So the at will give you an attribute for that, and you can extract it that way. So here is where things get a little funky. So Selenium doesn't allow you to actually download images through its process. So I actually had to write a function called getImage where it returns a URL. And then from the URL, I actually parse the path, and I extract from that path, I extract it, create a file name, and then write it to my images directory. So you'll see here that I have an images folder that just it vomits all of the images, and it's before it actually writes the image, it converts it to a UUID, because you have no idea what file they're going to file name they're going to return. So I don't care about their file name. I rewrite it with a UUID, and then I actually call this getImage function, which uses the request library to actually download the image itself. So, this is how, so one of the things you'll find with scraping is it's kind of just you have to bear down and claw your way through a lot of different things. So I'm using different techniques to get information out of here. This is actually a fairly straightforward way. I'm actually writing this, in 1024 bytes at a time, and then writing it to the block. So it's a fairly simple, tool to get, to extract images out of the file. And then the last thing is actually to get all of the dates from this. So if we look at this last section here, this code on the right is all of the dates for the show times that they have. And what you'll see here is that they don't give you, times from the Unix epic and things like that. So, which would be great, because that would make my life a lot easier. They also don't give you time zone information. So, if you're going to extract information, you have to give it, you have to either specify the time zone, which is the appropriate thing to do, or, or you get a time zone without a date time object without a time zone. So, there's multiple different ways to take a human readable string and extract date time out of it. One of the ways to do so is actually using this library called, what is it called actually? The parse date time. So parse date time, you can pass in a arbitrary string and it will just run through its regex of possibilities and return a result. It's actually fairly good. I haven't had any problems using that. And it returns this, you instantiate it using the calendar class, and then you parse the text that you get back. And then from that, it'll actually return a time struct, which you use the maketime function, Python's maketime function, and maketime will return back an event, date and time. And then that gets appended to a list, and then that list is actually what's gets written to this events thing and gets returned back to our runner application. So at the end of that, our runner returns and we loop over every event in the events list and write it to our Peewee table. So let's look at the models table again here and just look. So I don't know if you're familiar with using Peewee. Peewee is is an ORM that's independent of any other framework. Peewee's kind of nice because writing queries with Peewee is almost like writing SQL. It's very straightforward to use. I love Django's ORM, but it's kind of it abstracts some of the select statements away from you. For this use case, we're just using a SQLite table, but like Django, it supports Postgres, it supports MySQL, it supports any number of different database backends. And you specify different field types, and you can pass in null or so SQLite internally only has 4 or 5 different data elements. I think it's integer, float, text, and I don't remember the 4th one. But so everything that it uses gets converted, and the nice thing is Peewee will automatically convert those into date time objects or what have you back, so you don't have to worry about all of that. So the nice thing is whatever you're using as your backend, I could easily, instead of using SQLite, I could use Postgres. I would have to pass in connection parameters to the Postgres Peewee instance, but I would get a DB connection. I connect, and then Peewee, you have to tell it to create tables. So you pass in a list of tables you want it to create, and if you pass in the safe flag, it will not try and create those tables if they exist. So, why don't we actually run this instead of just talking about it, and we'll see. So I'm running this runner application. My laptop is exceedingly slow, so this may take a little bit to work. But what we'll see here is Firefox should pop up and start. Oh, here it is. So Firefox is actually, I'm not touching anything. It is extracting all the information from every one of these pages using the same XPath that we just did. And it'll run through fairly quickly because as soon as it gets the element that it wants, it just extracts and moves on. So what's nice about this is that you can run this as often as you need to, like anything. It's just automated web browser management. So it's handling all of the input, typing in values into the field. If you actually have to submit forms, you can call input keys and type in a value, and it'll input the keys into there. And you can see that it's going to the next link and the next link and the next link. And while it's doing it, it's downloading all of this information that we specified in our Xpath Helper. It extracts it and shoves it into that events table. Well, actually, the events table gets written to at the very end of this. So it's almost done. The Tut season goes through August, I think, so we're almost there. That's the last show of the season. And so when it's finished, we actually call driver.quit, and we kill our WebDriver. Right now, it's actually writing. SQLite is also very slow, so because it's writing to the file system, it's not designed for multiple users to access it and so forth. So once it finishes writing everything to the table, it will exit. And it's also downloaded those images and stored them. So what this scraper doesn't do is dedupe. If you're doing scraping, obviously, I don't want to keep scraping the same thing over and over again. Sometimes shows will change dates, times, etc., but you may want to check that. It also doesn't dedupe the images. So one way to do that would be simple is store the image, store the MD5 hash. If I have the hash, don't write it to the disk. So that's. Now that it's completed, it's closed the Firefox browser, and it's done its work. So fairly straightforward. So that is just one of the sites that it scrapes. I used that one because it has. Is probably one of the easier ones to work with. Their HTML is probably the least heinous. So before I go on any further, anybody have any questions about? Yeah, Eli.
You said it doesn't cover dedupe. Is it doing anything to cover dates that are before today?
No. So all right. So Eloy's question, so that for our posterity's sake, they can record it on the audio feed. Eloy was asking, does it record? What does it do about dates that are in the past? So it doesn't do anything with that. So you can see in our events table here. Asgard Games had events that occurred on the last month, so it hasn't gotten rid of those. Honestly, I wouldn't delete any of the events. What I would do is when I run the query in my Flask app, which I'll let's see here. I can actually, so this is my query. I could actually say start date is not none and greater than or equal to today, and that would get rid of that. Justin.
So are you aware of there's a date time at strp time, so you can put in a date time format and have to bring that into the library.
Yeah, so I use that actually, and some of the weird things that these sites do is just it's just like I don't want to deal with it. So my goal with all of these is each individual scraper should take less than 30 minutes to write. So I'm just outsourcing date time parsing to this library. But I understand. I mean, I can actually see this causing a lot of problems and headaches because I actually was using. So I have an NBA parser too, which is at the moment broken, but it actually localizes the time because. You would think that, ESPN's website could figure out, hey, you're in the central. No, it can't do that. What are you, crazy? No, it can't.
Parts of it does, but not all of it.
No, yeah. So it'll return back dates and times in the Eastern time zone, and obviously, so if you're newer to programming, you want to store dates in UTC, which is Universal Time. And the reason for that is that you can then convert it at any point to whatever date time your localized time is in. So you can actually call localize here and return back the get a UTC and then modify that. So that would be the next step is actually store dates in UTC, and it does it here, and I was too lazy to add it to the other things.
So you're gathering data from multiple levels, right?
Yeah.
And are you binding? I mean, when you're compiling data, are you binding them also across levels, or is it just the one level that you're insert data?
Yeah. So all of them come into that common namespace in that events table. Let me show you the actual table here. So you saw that it wrote. Bear with me 1 second. You saw that it wrote to that Peewee table there. But we can actually, if we look at the actual thing, it's all stored in one single table, and every application is stored there. So, every website's data is stored there. Okay, so this is actually inside PyCharm. You can select so if you look here, this is the raw SQL query. And so each event gets its own line in the table. And so you can see it's got the start date. The end date applies to certain websites will publish the end dates, event description, the event title. And you can see here that this is a fairly raw thing. Like I haven't stripped out the star from the Nutcracker page. The URL that you can link to. Can the ballet spend at least like $30 and get a real website? I don't understand sorry. So the image table will actually point a URL to the thing, and then I've manually specified the venue when I start the parser. But actually, so the Symphony decided to be jerks, and they have 98% of their things at Jones Hall. But then Symphony events also occur at like random places around town, and you have to actually look for the location. So I didn't include that into the parser, but there is that would be something there. But you can see here that each one of these, is linked to an individual page, and PyCharm is paginating this. But I have Barnes and Noble events at the store. These are GameStop games that are coming out, so they're all normalized into the same thing. So obviously, a game may have more, stuff in it that I would want to put in, like the price. Or maybe I want to put ticket prices for all of these things. Some of them are free, but I don't have any cost information stored in here. So it'd be an interesting thing. What other fields do we need to add to make that available?
It needs to scrape the Steam Summer Sale so that you can just buy every game under $1.99.
I actually had a Steam parser going, and I haven't. I need to update it. So I'm ahead of you there. There are actually several ones on here that they aren't ready for, they aren't working fully. But yeah, it's sweet because then, Steam has a bunch of games and they have a new releases page, and, so all you got to do is just add that on there, and it'll be included in the events table. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're using, the question was, do you need to run this in the foreground or can you run it in the background? So actually, you can just use Phantom.js. Phantom.js uses a WebKit browser, but it writes to a virtual frame buffer. So it doesn't actually open up a window. It'll run the page and it'll scrape all the data from there using the virtual frame buffer, and then it outputs it. It works. It uses WebKit, so it renders everything, and you can run this on an EC2 instance. So you could scrape the sites every day or however often you need to, and then it would put it on there. So
you can run Firefox on the EC2 instance as well. Firefox web browser. There's like a headless version of Firefox.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, well, there you go. So I only use Firefox because it's super easy to work with. Chrome requires a driver, which, I mean, it's not hard. You just load Chrome driver in the directory. Phantom.js is Node. There's also one called Ghost.py, which is I believe it's a Python. It has Python bindings, but it uses a Qt-based web browser. So there are many different browsers out there. So it's good to know that Firefox can run headless, though. All right. So I'm going to just show you one more site scrape. So the ballet sucks, right? Their stuff is terrible, and I don't really like the ballet. But I have their parser here, and one of the things that was I don't know who the. All right, I'll stop complaining about the ballet. So the way that they do this is there's a p tag, right? So there's a TD, there's a p tag, and then they just in between tags they vomit out text. So it's like screw you, I don't want you to scrape my site. Well, I'm going to take your data anyway. So there's actually a way to do this running. So Selenium, the nice thing about Selenium is you can inject arbitrary JavaScript into the browser, execute it, and return whatever results you want. So in our document, we extracted the XPath to get the links. We're now inside of our page, and now we're stuck. How do I get the event description? So you can run this arbitrary JavaScript, which is listed here, the return document.evaluate, and you can see that there is a long there's a XPath here. So XPath, and this is getting into more advanced stuff, but you can actually run XPath functions to extract values out of nodes that don't necessarily have a clean. So this is what I'm actually saying is after that p tag that we saw on that page, following the p tag, extract the text, and that when we run it inside the browser, clear? No? Okay. When we run that, it returns the text that we're looking for. So the problem is Selenium doesn't allow you to do this. You can't call these functions inside of the Selenium XPath. It will return an error message. And the reason for that is, I don't know the reason for it. So you have to use the JavaScript to do that. And you pass in this document.evaluate function. The evaluate function will execute whatever XPath you're looking for. You have to pass in the DOM node, and then what is the type that you want it to return. So the valid types here are actually nodes, and it can return any type, and then it'll try and figure out what it's doing: Boolean, number, string, etc., etc., etc. And then if we run that, it returns this XPath result class, and then what we really want out of it is the string value. And then, of course, because they're jerks, they put a bunch of white space around it, and then you have to strip that also. So we strip that inside our XPath.
This is going to YouTube.
What's that?
This is going to YouTube.
Oh, yeah, probably. I'm not. Hey, what are they going to do to me? So, So we trim the string, and then we return that result back. And then that result is actually what shows up in our UI. So there's the Nutcracker text that we had from before. So it's, again, it's not there. You're going to have to figure it out. Each one of these is, we're not Google, right? Google has bots that can figure out, based on what it's looking at, extract information. Oh, that's a date. That's a and it works really well, right? But if you're trying to scrape sites for your own data and pull information, you kind of have to get your hands dirty and do this. And, there's Scrapey out there. Scrapey is very nice. It's got a nice, clean API. It's easy to work with. But it doesn't, sometimes there's data that you just can't get to. And rather than writing some in Scrapey and writing some in Selenium and writing I just said we'll just do it all in Selenium, and it makes it a lot easier to work with. And so that's kind of the I've had to use that 2 or 3 times because it occurs somewhat infrequently. Barnes and Noble's website, obviously, or oddly enough, also does it. And it's kind of interesting when you see this because you can see that like 3 people have done most of the websites in Houston. So because they use the same class names, they use their same CSS. It's not Bootstrap or anything like that. They use their own kind of secret sauce and then and build stuff. So yeah, I mean that's I would like one of the things I would like to do is if you guys are interested in adding your own scraper to this, then I think it would be fun to have like a little side project that we can all work on. It takes it's one function that you write. And then we all benefit from being able to aggregate this information. I'd like to throw this up on EC2 so we can, get the Steam summer sale. Actually, a lot of websites scrape data, right? Scraping is not. So the thing about scraping from a copyright and legal standpoint, and I'm not a lawyer, but what they tell you is that if you're doing harm to the person who's providing this, there is a legal, they have a reason to disallow you from doing, from scraping their sites. Some sites will have terms of service. Most of these are actually businesses, and they're getting financial benefit from you scraping their site. So they're actually, most of these people will be actually okay with this. So, adding to this, I mean, what I wanted to add was, movie showtimes, to this. So I know what movies are coming out, and then they show up as an event, and then I can watch them whenever they're available. Well, they're actually APIs too. So some of these smaller local things we're not going to have APIs to query from. So in the event that there is an API, obviously I'm not going to write Selenium code to do this. I would write make API requests and get the data that way. It is nice to have this though, just as a, to be able to do both instead of it's all API driven. There's going to be some things that you're just not going to get to. I think, I don't think the Ballet or any of these other services would really care. If you're driving traffic to ultimately they want people in the seats. So.
I have a comment and a question.
Yep.
For dates, there's a Python library called Arrow.
Okay.
And you can just give it a string, and it'll usually figure out what it is. So it's really good. Try that out. And then my question is, so you use XPath. Is there any reason to do CSS, or what's better with CSS or XPath, or it doesn't matter?
XPath tends to be faster for things. For this use case, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're looking at searching for a really complex, long document, XPath will be faster. CSS selectors have some limitations. This following a P tag with text, there's not a really a good way to do it. When I started working on this, I was trying to learn, just trying to see what does XPath give you. There's actually a lot of stuff inside XPath. It has its own DSL. It has all this stuff that you can do with it, like this calling functions. You can call before, after, following, all these things that can give you more information. So I found it to actually be a lot more robust than I thought it would be. But yeah, you could easily query with CSS. You could easily query with element and ID tags. The challenge you face is a lot of these sites don't have any IDs on their entire application or their entire markup. So it's all class-based. So it's a little bit more, you have to loop through the things that you're finding. Whereas with XPath, you can get to where you're looking for a little bit easier. I think at the end of the day, though, it's personal preference. Like, I think you can get where you want with each. The other thing that I was doing was I was initially extracting this, throwing it into Beautiful Soup, and then trying to pull data out that way. And the problem with Beautiful Soup is you can't do anything, even though it's an LXML, it uses LXML underneath the hood. you can't use XPath with Beautiful Soup. So there were certain things that I just couldn't extract. So
in that example, the row and the column where you have the one after it, that's selecting the second element.
So it's first index. It's one index. Yeah.
That, to me, that's one of the big differences between XPath is that
right.
with the CSS selectors, I can't say the third table on the page.
Well, you could use child, right?
I don't know if it works with those. It might.
It may work with I don't know if that's JavaScript or if that's if jQuery it allows you to extract it with that.
Well, I mean, it used to not be standard, but child.
Right, it's a valid CSS selector for sure, and the CSS will load it. So I don't know if the CSS processor from these applications would do that.
Yeah, the Selenium CSS processor is a little older, so.
Okay.
You were trying, but that to me that stands out as something where you need this number of element on the page. It's real handy.
Yeah.
How much would your job be easier if you have a system?
I mean, it would be easier. I think one of the things that I would lack was image support. Scraping the sites gives you some more information that may not necessarily be there. I mean, a lot of these services are not sophisticated. Like, and I don't know if you've ever been to Murder by the Book's website. It is it's clearly a small bookstore, and they let's see. So the way that you get to their page, they don't have a lot of information on their site. So I just prefer doing it this way. This just made it a lot easier for since they don't provide all of this information. And these events, 6 people show up. So they don't have a lot of sophistication in the way they build things. So you end up having to scrape everything for you. Now, I mean, the other thing you could do is build an RSS feed for them through this. So I've also seen there are a lot of hobby shops around town that use Google Calendar for everything, for their calendaring events, and which is it's in an iframe. Like, I mean, I don't know why you would use an iframe for anything, but that kind of stuff it's out there. So
at least you can get the iCal feed from that.
Sort of.
It's a public calendar. You can be able to figure out what the iCal is.
Yeah, it's a little awkward. You have a question?
With the execute script where you wrote that custom JavaScript, can you run any JavaScript?
Yeah.
So if they had if they loaded jQuery on the site and you wanted to run your own jQuery on top of
sure.
that stuff, you could do that?
Yeah, you can do whatever you want. So you can actually get the DOM this way. So if you want to load the page and then have JavaScript manipulate the page and then extract the DOM, you can do that. It'll return the DOM as it is in memory. You can execute, arbitrary, any JavaScript.
That we have is actually interacting with the site itself. So like pushing a button and then having something that renders and then scraping that.
Right.
We do that as well, and it's similar. That's what Selenium's.
Yeah,
it'll do
Selenium.
Ajax fallback or something, and it's what we want.
Right. Yeah, so you can execute whatever JavaScript you want. I mean, for the most part, it's to extract information when you're using it with this. But I mean, you could theoretically, nuke the page and load whatever you wanted in there, or insert DOM elements in there that didn't exist, or so.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
What is your wish list? What is your ultimate goal for this project? What would you where do you want us to go?
So what I want to ultimately be able to do is, I think, I want to be able to just pull up my phone and then just have, so I want to be able to filter my feed so that I have, if I like, basketball and I like, because that's the thing is when you're on a ESPN, right? They're not going to show you the frickin' ballet on ESPN's website, right? And that's the problem. Everything is siloed in their respective world. What I'm trying to pull into all of this is all the possible things. Hey, if I don't care about, if AutoZone has, Tony Stewart coming to the local AutoZone, I don't really care about that. But I can just remove that from my feed and it doesn't show up. But if somebody does care about it, then you can add that, have that in there. It's parsed and it's loaded. And then, you just tell it what you're interested in. So the other thing that I've wanted to add to this was, so like you can get movie databases and things like that, and just say, start adding in, showtimes for movies, showtimes for, any like this movie is now coming out on Netflix or on Redbox. So it's effectively what I want to do is I have a free night. What are all of my possible options for things that I know I like to do, and then I pick that. So maybe we scrape the Netflix, new releases feed, and then we have that. I think there's lots of different possibilities. So
would you say essentially this is what Google Now is trying to do?
Google Now doesn't really get close to this though, because they're not scraping local. Like people have weird tastes, right? Like if you want to do weird things, you can get. You can parse the feed. Google doesn't have a lot of that stuff. So, Google Now does do some things like, oh, you're 30 minutes away from home. Well, no, asshole, I'm in New York. I'm not trying to go home right now. I don't know what the hell you're trying to tell me. Like it does that, right? And it's not intelligent. I want to be able to say, these are the things I actually care about and give me that information direct into that feed. So that's more what I'm looking for.
So why isn't the Python meetup on the scraper? Just saying.
So meetup.com doesn't have an API.
Yeah.
So their API is actually allows you to query a user and the user get information about a user, but it doesn't allow you to pull meetup feeds. Like this meetup is meeting here. Now you can scrape their site and get that information, but
a lot of the time you need to be a member to be able to see.
Yeah, you have to be a member for that, or for a lot of those things. So it'd be cool if it had that, because that would be a great source of information. Like I can incorporate that. The other thing is we can also just add a UI that you can add arbitrary events into. So you want to somebody's birthday party is coming up, you can add that into that event feed, and then it'll show up in the in there as well.
Google Now does.
Why not? Why not just produce an ICS and then just stream the ICS?
Because I don't want 8,000 events on my calendar.
Well, I'm not saying your calendar. I'm saying you create a new calendar on the phone, and those events go there instead of.
Yeah, you could do that. You could export the ones that I want to. I think that would be the once I say this is the event I'm going to, then add it to that calendar. But the problem is there's once there's 50 things on there, then it gets less useful. So it would actually be nice to Tinderize it and just swipe left. I don't want to see this ever again, and then swipe right. Put it on my calendar, and then it just shows up on Google Calendar or something like that. I think that would be the ideal way to interact with that.
Did you do anything with having to log in first?
No. So all of this is all on public, but login is actually not any different. So you open up the driver page and you call driver.sendKeys, and then you pass in your username. Then you select the password field, send keys your password, and then you should be logged in at that point. And then you scrape from there. So if that were ever the case, if I wanted to scrape meetup.com, then I could, I would have a login that I could extract info from. But I think it's hard because ideally they should. I guess that's their secret sauce is they get paid for the people who host it pay them. So I don't know why they wouldn't want to give the.
Just be careful when you do that stuff. I know, LinkedIn, if you do that, they'll kick you off.
Yeah.
Just start scraping stuff.
That's what they do.
We don't do it to us.
They want to charge you.
Yeah, there are sites like Amazon is complete jerks about scraping their site. So they have strict terms of service. If you want to get their pricing information, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but their URLs actually change for the same product. So they don't stay consistent across multiple for multiple days. So you could scrape it with Selenium, but they have a limit on the number of calls that you make. They're very, very careful about that because what they're worried about is Target screen scraping them and then price gouging them. So
You've seen camel. It's every URL, Amazon URL has an ID, and go to camel.com. You use the ID, and it essentially does historical pricing, so you can get a notification when it's the lowest price. You just click on this, and it'll give you pricing.
That's very cool.
So I don't know how they do it, or these guys do it.
I mean, maybe they're using this ID as the
Exactly, and that is in the URL. I mean, I think everything about that in the URL probably changes. Let's see if that works.
Sure does.
This isn't a Selenium, but this is a camel. Does it only work with Amazon? So you see that ID is in the The other stuff does change though.
Keywords. Yeah, they're very tricky about the. But that's interesting. I didn't know because it uses part of the text of the item is in the URL, so they do a lot of weird things to. But I mean, I think it's consistent across browser sessions, and it may be even for a few hours that it's the same URL, but it changes. So, yeah. Yeah, but so if you're interested in adding your own event parsers and then including
It must have some way because Amazon stuff does show up on Google, right?
I think Google pays for it though, or Amazon pays Google to show those. The Google Shopping is all paid for.
Well, it's not in the shopping. It shows up in.
It's all organic, yeah.
So it must have something.
Either that or Amazon has a explicit pass for Google servers. Yeah.
Whitelisted or something.
Yeah. So. Yeah, but if you want to have access to this, it's all on Bitbucket. I can share it, or I can make it public. So Tertius is recording this. So if you want to pull it up, where will it go?
I'll post it in the meetup. In today's meetup, will just be a comment with everything.
Cool. If anyone else has any questions, please come ask me.